Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Gwilda Wiyaka's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the Science of Magic or endorsed in any manner by Gwilda Wiyaka, Relmar McConnell Media Company, its affiliated networks, stations, or employees. Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Welcome to the Science of Magic, a place where science and magic come together to transform fact into evolving truth. We're coming to you through the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. We can also be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour we'll be exploring life everlasting. I've been more dead than alive most of my life. Not that I'm in poor health. Quite the contrary. Overall, I'm a very healthy person. Let me back up and clarify what I mean by life and death in this particular application. I think of life as this low, very narrow, polarized, segregated bandwidth of frequency that most of the human population consider to be reality. Death is access to and uniting with everything. From my earliest memories, I've been privy to much greater bandwidth than most. Who's to say why? Naturally, I don't remember the incident, but my mother told me I nearly died from pneumonia when I was 6 months old. Maybe it started then, or maybe I just came in that way. When I was 4, my parents divorced. My mother left me with my father and my stepmother on his small farm to go overseas with her new husband. I was very traumatized and very lonely. When my step-siblings would go to school, I'd sit under an ancient cottonwood tree and listen to the meadowlarks sing. An old man used to come sit with me and tell me about the unity of all things. He taught me to talk to the tree, hear the whisperings on the wind, and understand the meadowlark's song. Not far from the farmhouse we lived in was the original homestead. It was a fallen-down house we used for storage. I was in it one day with my stepmother, who was exchanging a box of winter clothes for summer ones. That day I noticed an ancient, dusty brown photograph on the wall of an old man and woman. The man was my friend. I was so excited, I was squealing and jumping up and down as I pointed it out to my stepmother and told her of his visits. He had been the original owner of the farm and had died long before I was born, my stepmother informed me, and proceeded to beat me for lying. Well, the beating didn't stop me from seeing him or visiting with him. I just learned to keep my own counsel. As I grew older, I started to realize that many of the people and animals I could see were invisible to others. My stepmother's lessons stuck with me, however, and I told no one. It might have been her greatest gift to me, as over the years, my silence probably kept me from being medicated or locked in an asylum. When I was 20 and in college, I had a serious spinal injury while competing in gymnastics. A year later, I had to undergo a spinal fusion as the injury just didn't heal. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, I'm very sensitive to drugs, and to make a long story short, I died on the operating table several times. This incident I do remember. I was floating above my body while the doctors and nurses scrambled to revive me. I wondered, why are they so upset? Couldn't they see me right here in the room? Then I smelled roses, and I saw the opening to a long tunnel. I heard my deceased grandmother and grandfather and my old friend from the farm calling to me from the light at the other end. Memories of my life passed by as I expanded my frequency in an attempt to reach the light and my deceased loved ones. Meanwhile, back on the operating table, they drove electricity into my chest, restarting my heart. I was slammed back into my drug body and knew no more. In the short time I was gone, I had many more enlightening revelations about life and death than we have time to explore here today. But the point is, reality is ever so much more than we've been led to believe. Ever since that time, I've not feared death. I don't look forward to the process, but I am anxious to rejoin the glory of all that is. My guest this hour has spent the greater part of her current life studying the afterlife. Roberta Grimes is a business attorney who had two extraordinary experiences of light in childhood that prompted her to spend decades studying nearly 200 years of abundant and consistent afterlife evidence. Roberta has a BA in religion from Smith College and a JD from Boston University School of Law. She's the author of numerous nonfiction books, including her hallmark work, Liberating Jesus. She's also written various fiction works, such as her latest remarkable novel, My Thomas. Roberta issues weekly podcasts on webtalkradio.net called Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes, and she blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. I will introduce Roberta and her formidable body of work after this short break. You're listening to The Science of Magic. This and other innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State-certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our very special guest this hour is business attorney and author Roberta Grimes. She's the author of numerous compelling books, including Liberating Jesus and My Thomas. Roberta, having the good fortune to peruse your many wonderful literary works, I'm very impressed with your amazing body of knowledge about the afterlife and the nature of reality. Thank you so much for joining us on The Science of Magic.
Well, Gwilda, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I know you get asked this one all the time, but what made an attorney want to study death and afterlife?
Well, the urge came long before I went to law school. When I was 8 years old, I had an experience of light. I woke up in the middle of the night. I thought suddenly, what if there's no God? I was terrified. I was only 8. And in the midst of my terror, there was a bright flash of white light in the room. You could look at it. It was spiritual light, not physical light. And a voice said, you wouldn't know what it is to have me if you didn't know what it is to be without me. I will never leave you again. Now, when you're 8, everything is surprising, so nothing is. I thought at the time, isn't it handy that if you forget there's a God, they remind you, and I went back to sleep. But that experience is as vivid in my mind 60 years later as it was that next morning.
Wow, that's phenomenal, and no doubt totally changed your life.
Yes, but you had amazing experiences too. I loved hearing about yours. I think it's important that people know so many people that you see walking on the street have had extraordinary things happen that they don't talk about.
Exactly. I think that's why it's so important that we expose ourselves and share so that other people's don't grow,
Oh, yeah,
into the world feeling so isolated. So,
that's
Roberta,
right.
let's play with ghosts and goblins and things that go bump in the night. In my experience, there are spirits of people that have passed but not crossed over. I call these ghosts. There are
Yes.
spirits of people that have passed and crossed over but come back to help, and I call these helping spirits. Would you speak to this and how to tell the difference?
Well, there's a huge difference. First, we have to understand that the way reality is constructed, there are at least 7 levels, major levels, a lot of sublevels of afterlife reality that exists exactly where we are right now. There's nothing solid, including the material level. And right now our minds are just tuned like a TV to this level. That's why we think we're here. And when we die, we just go to it's like we change from channel 2 to channel 5 and we pick up a whole new solid reality. So it's all right here, which means that all our loved ones have to do is lower their vibratory rate a little bit, and they're right in the room with us. We can't see them, but they're right where we are. So what happens at death is that we begin to raise, as part of the natural process of dying, we begin to raise our vibratory rate. And we're able then to see people we used to think were dead who come for us. This seems to be a universal phenomenon, that the dead will come and take us away. Because it doesn't seem to be natural. You don't know when you're a little baby coming out into the world which way the exit is, and so you get forced out. Well, we're sort of lovingly forced back to the greater reality by our loved ones. But the problem is, if during that time when we are newly free of our body and we're at a higher vibratory rate and we can see these folks, if we're distracted by those around the deathbed, oh, he's dead, oh, she's dying, what do we do? And people are upset. You want to comfort your loved ones because you know you're just fine. If you lower your vibratory rate at that crucial moment, you can find it impossible to see your loved ones any longer. They came for you, and you're stuck. You're stuck out of time, and you could be stuck that way for hundreds of years. That's what a ghost is.
That makes absolute sense to me because what I've experienced when I'm doing bedside helping people cross, which I'm called to do in this line of work, is they start going through some of their past life trauma, the traumas from their actual life. And at first, it's like, well, Winston Churchill says, when you're going through hell, keep going, because it's very
Yes.
traumatic for the person oftentimes. And really, what's going on is they're revisiting the places that they lost their frequency through trauma during their lifetime on their way back out. And if they can just stay with that, not be called off, not be distracted, then they can cross. And if they don't, they get stuck here sometimes. Is that your experience as well?
I'm not expert in fragment, although I know that apparently it happens. I don't know how often the fragmentation of our mind happens, but apparently trauma can do it. And it makes sense that our spirit guides, who love us very much, would be helping us sort of reassemble what we might have lost when we're in the process of getting ready to go. But my study sort of begins at the actual death process, which begins usually within about 24 hours before we actually cross with our seeing our loved ones. And often the people at the bedside will see those people who have come for us. Raymond Moody, who wrote a wonderful book in 2010 called Glimpses of Eternity, in which he coined the term shared deathbed visions, because sometimes we can see the people who've come for those we love.
That's absolutely been my experience. In fact, I can tell when someone's getting ready to cross because there's a lot of people in the room outside of the ones in physical form. It's a beautiful time. We've come to fear death, but it's such a gorgeous transition if you can relax into it and be there with a person.
A lot of people say, why did you call your book The Fun of Dying? Dying's not fun. It isn't fun to get there, but the actual process, the dead tell us, is thrilling. It feels terrific, and it's fun. And so the word comes from the dead. It doesn't come from me.
So how do you access this word?
Most people have no awareness that we have almost 200 years of abundant and consistent communications from the dead. Completed deaths. This is a different process from near-death experiences, which are much more varied for reasons we can talk about if you like. But a completed death is one that we can then learn, once we talk to these people, we can learn in particular what it's like where they are and what the process was and so on. And in the early, about 100 years ago, in the early part of the 20th century, we were getting extraordinary communications, both in the northern U.S. and in the London area. Different people over 30-some years through different mediums. Hundreds of these communications are in print, and I've read them. And if you read them, you find that they all talk about precisely the same set of events, the same physics, the same process, the same things you do right after death, the same nature of God, the same, they tell us the meaning and purpose of life. They're all talking about the same thing. And it would not be possible for them to do that if there wasn't a real afterlife with real, consistent characteristics. So that's what really got me excited and got me to investigate deeper what happens at death. Because we can prove it's real. Otherwise, you wouldn't have so much consistent information and nothing inconsistent. All of those communications.
It's so fun to look at, and I've studied a lot of different religions, and in the original form, each of them had a provision for helping people cross, for holding the space so they could get over. Like as a Lakota pipe carrier, I carry the dead, the spirit of the dead, for a full year. Talk about being schizophrenic. And then help, so the family has time to mourn, and then help them cross. And that's just one instance of different ways of helping the dying process. But we've gotten away from our religions and our roots, and now people are kind of left on their own to fumble their way through the process. And if they can raise their frequency enough to connect with their helping spirits, they have guidance. But the ones that get stuck here, get interrupted or whatever, do you find that you can communicate with them? And if so, are they a reliable source of information?
Some of them can be communicated with, but they don't know a blessed thing. A lot of them don't even realize that they're dead.
Just because they're dead doesn't mean they're smart, right?
No, they don't know anything. But in some cases, there are cases where they will spin a good yarn and try to tell you stuff which is not true. So, don't talk to them. The only thing that you can do, and it's very helpful if you're able to contact someone who is stuck outside of time that way, is just simply to say, look around. Do you see anybody you recognize? And typically they will recognize the people who are still waiting for them. And then say, go with these people. They're going to take you home. And that's how you truly can rescue these folks. Rescuing goes on. It's everybody eventually will be rescued, but because there are so few doing the rescue work, it's going to take a lot of time.
It's a full-time job because so many people, and I do psychopomp work, which is helping the dead to cross. And it's like there's a whole populace out there, people that died a sudden death and don't know they're dead in an accident or under anesthesia or didn't have a faith behind them to know what to do at the time of crossing. And talk about denial. Like you say, a lot of them don't even know they're dead. So those of us that can encourage it, if we touch into them, if we can encourage them to cross, but it's real important not to take them on. Have you done any work or studied anything about possessing spirits?
I only liked to study certain things, and possession was one of the things until very recently, I just didn't want to know about. But in fact, it is relatively easy if we don't protect our spiritual defense system, commonly called our aura. It's not difficult for us to pick up pretty nasty and sometimes just very confused beings who, for one reason or another, feel the need to latch on to us. Typically, one of the strains of this problem comes from addictions. People who are addicted to drugs, alcohol, for some reason also sex, will sometimes refuse to go and will try to latch onto someone else's body. If you get drunk in a bar, apparently that shreds your aura enough that you can be pretty guaranteed you're going to start carrying around people who will keep telling you need another drink. This is one reason people become alcoholic, because it isn't just their craving now, it's some dead people who have the same craving.
So
Lord.
when they're, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, isn't that awful? I can't even think about it.
It is. Yeah. So it's like when you drop your own frequency through imbibing in alcoholic beverages, you become available or attuned to a frequency of something that has already crossed, or not crossed, but died, and wants to be able to continue with the addiction. Is that what you're seeing there?
Yes. And apparently the process of becoming intoxicated by drugs or by alcohol literally causes holes to develop in our aura. It sort of shreds enough that they can jump inside. If you are maintaining a healthy spiritual aura, it's virtually impossible for a possessing spirit to latch on, or so I'm told.
Wow. Well, we're going to have to take a break. This is just so much fun, Roberta. We'll return to our discussion after this short break. You're listening to The Science of Magic. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. You want to hear more? Other innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school, training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com.
What if Jesus came back now and insisted that we listen to him? How would the world be different if Christians really followed the Gospels? For 2,000 years, we've been practicing a religion. Now it's finally time to get it right. Read Liberating Jesus, new from Roberta Grimes. Meet the Jesus you never knew. Roberta uses afterlife evidence and biblical analysis to prove that Jesus is exactly right. Learning the lessons that he came to teach is the reason we are born at all. Roberta says he has come back now to insist that we actually listen to him so we can begin to use his teachings to unite and transform the world. Liberating Jesus wherever books are sold. Jesus has the answers, and it's not too late. Roberta blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com.
Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. We can be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our special guest this hour is author of Liberating Jesus, Roberta Grimes. She can be found at www.robertagrimes.com. Roberta, welcome back.
Oh, I'm so glad to be with you. We're having so much fun. And I love that
this
you
is
know
a blast.
so many things.
You know, one thing we were getting into towards the end last time is how when people lose their way, crossing is not necessarily easy or smooth. And your book, Liberating Jesus, just really pulls back how important it is to have guidance and faith and enlightenment through our spiritual evolution. Would you tell us a little bit about your book?
Oh, thank you. When I was doing the afterlife research, one thing that not only, I'm not the only one in this situation, everyone who seriously investigates the afterlife evidence finds that there is no evidence for any of the major Christian teachings. You don't have to be a Christian to get into the highest levels of heaven. God doesn't judge us. Actually, Jesus tells us that in the Gospels. No religious figure judges us. Jesus says that too. We are our own judge. Jesus tells us that. So much was not right, and I was such a zealous Christian. And finally, I'd read the Bible and read the Gospels over and over, but finally I specifically sat down and compared the teachings of Jesus in the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John with what the afterlife evidence tells us is true. And I found that Jesus had told us things about God, reality, death, the afterlife, and the meaning of our lives we could not have confirmed until the 20th century. I think this was a huge discovery. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, and because I've been a Christian for so long, I know what it is to be a Christian. It's too easy because we're told all we have to do is to claim Jesus as our Savior and we get right to heaven. God never judges anybody. God loves us infinitely. So that's not what does it. That doesn't help at all. What helps is following those teachings, and Jesus says that. So eventually, there are appendices in The Fun of Dying and The Fun of Staying in Touch that say this stuff. But finally, I had to just plain write it. It was hard. But I think it's important that people know this. If you love Jesus, understand that he is speaking to you right now, and what he's telling you is the truth, and the only way to get it is to read the Gospels, and only the Gospels. That's really what Liberating Jesus is about. It seems only fair, don't you think?
Yeah, it's there. I know for me, it was like I was unencumbered by any religious training growing up. And so in college, I became totally intrigued with the Bible and what was said there. And so then I started trying to go to church, and I was flabbergasted that what they were telling me was meant by what was said wasn't what I was getting at all. And eventually I had to go back to, well, what is really being said? Because I think that Jesus is much larger than the individuals that might try to control by misinterpreting his words. Is that what you found, Roberta?
Oh, yes. The problem we have, Jesus is much more revered in the afterlife levels than here. They call him the Master. They don't call him by a name. And it doesn't matter what someone's religion was in life. Jesus is the big shot after we die. So it's time, I think, for us to take the wisdom that our dead loved ones know and apply it to our lives here. We are here to learn to love and forgive as a way to grow spiritually. That's the only reason the universe exists. Jesus tells us that. So it's time to throw away the whole Old Testament. Jesus, by the way, does that in the Gospels. He says that his teachings replace the law and the prophets. Therefore, you don't need those. The problem Christians have is that the early councils said, we are being inspired by God. This is God's inerrant word. And, based on what? I mean, that nobody necessarily... would you say that about something you wrote? Yet these people did. And there's no other evidence for it. And frankly, I've read the Gospels as well as all of the Bible repeatedly. I'd urge anyone who believes it has to be God's inerrant word to actually sit down and read the Old Testament. It's not. There are things so barbaric in the Old Testament that the God that the early Jews worshipped was not a God of love, was a God of judgment and a God of rage. The only God that exists, which Jesus tells us and which the dead tell us, is a God of infinite love and mercy, nothing but love, never judges us, only wants us to come and join him and be of his heart. And the only way to do that for most of us is to deliberately learn how to love and forgive. That's why my next book will be The Fun of Growing Forever. It'll be out next year, and it will talk about how to use the Gospels, just the Gospels, and modern life to really ace this lifetime and make yourself happy in the process. And Gwilda, the amazing and wonderful thing about it is if enough people live this way, we can have what God promised through the Gospels, which is God's kingdom on earth. It doesn't take all of us. It only takes a few people, maybe 10 or 15% of the world's population, strictly following those Gospels, and all of humanity will change. You don't need to go fight ISIS. You don't need to do anything else but change yourself. That's where change begins.
It is an inside job. And what I find so amazing is that we have this beautiful work in our hands. We've had it for 2,000 years. Yeah. And it's so simple to follow. And that to me is the point, is that, like you just said, the more of us that stand in the higher frequency of love and forgiveness and hold that, the whole world can be transformed. It doesn't take that many. So I've heard that and in my studies, that they hooked the Old Testament onto the New Testament, but the Old Testament really came from the Jewish tradition, and Jesus came to bring the next level of enlightenment as we got into a higher frequency time when we could receive it. Has that been what you're talking about here?
What you just said is absolutely perfect. Jesus says in the Gospels, remember, when he was teaching, to talk against the prevailing religion would bring a death sentence, so he had to be careful. And one of the things he did to fool the temple guards, the guards would change, but his followers would be constant from day to day. So he would say things over several days of time and elude capture for a little longer that way. Someone asked him one day, well, aren't you trying to replace the law and the prophets? Well, he looks at the temple guard nearby, and he says, no, I'm not here to replace the law and the prophets, which is what they call the Old Testament. I'm here to fulfill the law and the prophets. Well, so he squeaked by that day. Another day, someone said, well, teacher, what is the greatest commandment? Thinking of course, the 10 Commandments. Jesus gives us 2 new commandments. These are new commandments from God. He says, the greatest is you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Then he says something very important. He says, in that consists the whole law and the prophets. So at that moment, he said, when you're going to build my scripture, do not include the law and the prophets. I have fulfilled the law and the prophets, and I have replaced them with God's law of love. And Christians just don't think about it that way. But that's true. That's what happened. I mean, when I speak to Christians who are insistent on the dogmas, I say, okay, I think you should believe whatever comforts you and makes you happy. But since you believe Jesus died for your sins, doesn't it seem only fair that you actually read his words? I mean, if he didn't mean them to be read or heard and followed, he wouldn't have had to even have said a blessed thing if all he did was come to die for our sins. Just shows up, says, okay, here I am. I'm the sacrifice. Where's the cross? Let's get this done. That's all he would have had to do. He wouldn't have had to rise from the dead either if that were all he was doing.
This is just so fun, Roberta. Again, it was gone so fast. We're going to have to take another short break. We'll be back on the flip side of this break. You are listening to The Science of Magic. Our theme song, One People, One Nation, is from the Winds of Time album by my musical group Starfire and can be found on iTunes.com, cdbaby.com, Amazon.com, and my website, GwildaWiyaka.com. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State-certified occupational school, training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. We can be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our special guest this hour is business attorney and author Roberta Grimes. You can find Roberta at www.robertagrimes.com. Roberta, we were talking about how, and I love the way you put it, if all Jesus had to do was die for our sins, he wouldn't have had to spend all that time dancing around the palace guard and teaching. And I think that that's a really, really important point for all of us to focus on at this point, is that there is no replacement for personal processing, personal spiritual growth, and personal development. Would you speak to that a little bit?
Well, Jesus himself tells us this. He says things in the Gospels that otherwise would be inexplicable and even cruel. He says that to him who has, more will be given, and he'll have an abundance. To him who does not have, even what he thinks he has will be taken away. And throw that worthless servant out into the darkness, where there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth, which actually is the lowest afterlife level. He describes it pretty well. But that doesn't make sense to us, does it, unless we understand that what he's talking about is spiritual development. If we have more, we will grow more and more and ever more until we have achieved the level of the source eventually. If we are not paying attention to our spiritual growth, but we think we got a little bit, there's no holding still. You go ahead or you fall backward. And he warned us about that, and that turns out to be true. So the most important thing that we can do by far with this lifetime is to use everything that happens in our lives, especially the negative stuff, as opportunities to learn to better love and forgive. Not only does that make us happy now, much happier than any other process does, but it also helps us to raise our own spiritual vibration, so we'll achieve a higher afterlife level where there's even more fun and better snowboarding. But the other thing it does, too, is transform us and make us part of that army of people transforming ourselves internally so we can transform the world.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. It's in my Celtic tradition. In my Celtic teachings, my teacher told me that what creates evolution is being able to dance the joy and sorrow sine wave. In other words, taking them both in equal measure. And I think Jesus really demonstrated that through his life, that no matter what went on, he used it to evolve as an example for us. Is this the way you're seeing it?
Yes, of course he understood that everybody needed to be reached individually. So he taught the same basic truths in many different ways. And you can see in the Gospels how he was really interacting with different people as he taught it. I mean, for example, he was teaching us the fact that our minds are powerful, which the Christians call faith, but it's really your mind is powerful. When someone touched the hem of his garment, he turned and said, "Power went out of me. What happened?" And a woman said, "Oh, I just was healed." And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." He said this over and over again, that it was our own minds, our own faith, our own selves really that had done the healing. He said, toward the end of his life on earth, he said, "All these things I've done, you'll do, and greater. But you'll do it as you develop your mind, as you develop your spirit." And so it is just so important that we make that first in our lives. That if anybody who is a Christian who does not put living in a way that helps us better love and forgive foremost is not a follower. As Jesus said, if you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. That's true. Not people who say, "Well, I got my get out of hell free card. I told Jesus I was taking him as my Savior. Now I don't have to do another blessed thing. I can just live my life however I like." That's not what Jesus said. That's not a good teaching. So we are trying freshly in 2016 to begin to help people to follow Jesus in a way which is going to be productive for them, productive for the world.
His life was an amazing example of the path to follow to evolve spiritually. Everything he did seemed to be directed towards evolution of spirit, evolution of frequency, and
Yes.
What a living example. Roberta, do you hear him? You sound like a person that walks with him right by your side.
No, I only heard him when I was writing the book. Writing the book was really not my idea. I have prided myself all my life with the fact that I was not psychic. I'm an attorney, and I'm a dry researcher, and the facts, ma'am. That's all I want. So it was kind of a shock to discover when I'm in almost 70 years old that actually I've been channeling all my life, and all the books that I've written have really been channeled. I accept that now, but it was kind of a shock to the system. I thought I was a lot smarter than I actually was.
They kind of slid that one in on you, did they?
They did. But the glorious thing is, this is something I signed up for before I was born, and everybody listening has a life plan, signed up to do things before you were born. And the glorious thing is when you really meet your spirit guides, when you begin to follow their counsel more closely, and we all travel out of body when we sleep and meet with our guides and our dead loved ones and stuff. So we're already being counseled. But when you make it a closer walk with your spirit guides, it allows you to do so much more of what you plan to do, and that feels really good. You're in the zone of exactly where you're supposed to be.
That is such a sweet place to live, isn't it? Is doing what you need to be doing in any given moment. It's like truly living. And when you step off that path, which is what I consider to be sin, when you're suddenly not doing what you need to be doing in any given moment, things just go to heck in a handbasket. So it's so important, isn't it, to stay on that path?
Yes. And it's the only way to be happy. We think material things will make us happy. They won't. Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added to you. And frankly, you won't want them anyway, because it feels so good to be in that zone of God's perfect love and acceptance. That's where you're happiest. That's where everybody's happiest.
And really, that's where we belong, isn't it?
Yeah, it's coming home in the most ultimate way. And we're here for such a short time. Our minds are eternal. We never began, we never will end. And we're here for just a few minutes. So this life is really not important. And as Jesus says, the first will be last. Those who think they have really aced it here and they've achieved all kinds of success, when they get there, they'll find that the people who are far more developed spiritually will be the street sweepers, perhaps, or people that they disdained. You don't get to take with you any of the acclaim you get on earth. You only get to take your own spiritual growth.
My grandmother used to say, shrouds don't have pockets.
That's true, but there is a little bit of something that is not true. They say you can't take it with you. If you have achieved sufficient spiritual growth, what we find, what the dead actually are surprised to tell us, is that there's something they miss from the earth, some little trinket, some book, something. They just turn around and there it is in their house. So they're taking with them material things, which, it's surprising what people want to take, but it all is there. I think because our houses, which we have for a time, for as long as we want them, our houses are a way to help us get past the sense of loss that we might otherwise feel in having left the earth. And so if there's something else that you kind of wish was there, it's going to be there for you.
That's so reassuring to hear that. Roberta, it's been absolutely magnificent. Where can we find your books?
They're available everywhere. They're available in all the bookstores and, of course, on Amazon.com. And my website is RobertaGrimes.com. You can find them through there as well.
Perfect. Roberta, thank you so much for being with us. This has been The Science of Magic. Remember, you can always listen to this and other thought-provoking episodes on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. Until next time, dear ones, may you be blessed with knowledge and comforted with love.